Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. Junior singers, that was amazing. It was awesome. Doesn't that make you want to be in the junior singers? I want to be in the junior singers. I wish I could. So today in church, we're talking about atheism. Does anybody know what it means to be an atheist? No? Do you know? Oh. Well, and Asher, you know. Right. They don't believe in God or in the gods or in any God. Have you ever met anybody who said that they didn't believe in God? Yeah? A few people? We have some people here who don't believe in God. This is another question that I'd like to ask you, because I know that sometimes at school you're making new friends and you're meeting people and you're learning about how different people think in different ways. So I want to know if you met a person, or let's say that if a person was an atheist and they didn't believe in God, if you don't believe in God, does it mean that you're still a good person? Yes. You are a good person and you do good things whether you believe in God or not. Now let me ask you this. If you saw someone at school who was being picked on because they had a different belief about God, what would you do? What would you do, Rosie? It's rude. Yeah, someone in your neighborhood was doing that and you told them that it was rude. Yeah, great. Good for you. Yeah, what would you do? You would tell them to stop. Yes. Yes. Tell them to stop. Yes. What would you do, Kira? You would tell them to stop. That's right. That's right. Because I'm going to tell you a secret. Did you know a lot of people believe in the Bible, and that's where they get their ideas about God? But did you know that the Bible says no one has ever seen God? Even the Bible says no one has ever seen God. So all of us are just learning and doing the best we can, right? So I want you to remember that when you're talking to your friends and you're meeting people and they're telling you their ideas about God. What can you do when you meet someone who has different ideas about God than you do? How could you be their friend? Yes. It's okay to think different things in our brains. Yes, you're right. And you know what else you could do? You could say, I'd like to learn from you. Can you explain what you believe and let me learn something about it from you? Maybe then you can be stronger and better, and then you can share what you believe and they can learn something new. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. Well, thanks for listening to this. Thanks for talking with me. And we're going to invite our family forward to light the chalice. Kira, you're on it today. Come on up. The Taylor Jones family is lighting our chalice today. And Kira is ready to go. There you go. That's how I feel when I'm in the pulpit, too.
Symbol of light, symbol of knowledge, symbol of warmth, symbol of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
Yes. Great job. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to sing a hymn together. So I invite you all to rise in body or in spirit. And our opening hymn is number 21. And we get the organ today. Woohoo!
Composing a prayer for and about atheism didn't seem to make much sense. So if you'll forgive me, I'm going to just ramble a bit, offering some truly random thoughts. Maybe you might resonate with some, or maybe not. I want to start off by noting that most contemporary theologians, much like ourselves who have moved beyond the God of our childhood prayers and bedside rituals, most theologians today of all stripes agree that God, if there is a God, is ultimately indescribable. And yet, be that as it may, we sustain a terrible yearning to know the unknowable. Nietzsche's madman, confronted with the fact that God is dead, was cast into despair. Who will comfort us, he cried. Who will forgive us? Well, many an atheist, especially with some theological education, may wonder about these things much like the madman. In all our refutations of God's existence and our abandonment of such archaic ideas, perhaps we want to open up to or understand better or pay attention to feminist theology. Maybe make a little room in our thinking. If so, we might awaken to a religious impulse that has been dormant far too long. Because in contrast, from the ruins of male-dominated antiquity, feminist theologians have salvaged the memory of the goddess. We don't pay much attention, generally speaking, to the goddess. We think it's just a female form, but it's really quite different. The goddess. Feminist theologians have been careful to refrain from making the claim that the goddess exists out there in any objective and transcendent way. Unlike the traditional male god, author of creation, but separate from it, the goddess is understood to be identical with the rhythms of the natural world, and so importantly, the spirit of survival. You may have had need to call upon the spirit to survive. Think of the oppression, what women have gone through. Slaves, people of color, transgender, immigrants. It's a very powerful notion to this spirit that can carry us forward, that somehow assures us that we can survive. Now, frankly, there's no point in arguing about the existence of the goddess, because she exists as surely as the air and the mountains do. The only question is whether we choose to regard the air and mountains as nothing more than brute fact, a collection of subatomic particles, or whether we choose to appropriate them as catalysts of wonder, gratitude, inspiration. The goddess, if I may freely translate, is the spirit which prompts us to live our lives with meaning, integrity, and passion. She cannot be located or locked into any specific geographical area, but she beckons. Oh, she beckons. So the goddess, we might say, offers more of a functional definition of deity. It is possible, we can suppose, even short of clinical depression or pathology, it's possible to live one's life as if it had no meaning, as if one's decisions didn't matter, as if love was a sham, and truth and beauty just inaccessible. It is possible to act as we witness the current White House occupant. It is possible to act as if how one treats other people is of no consequence. I have actually not engaged in argument about the existence or non-existence of God for many decades. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. It's more important to discuss the sources of our values, meaning, integrity. Now, rather than dismiss the existence of God outright, isn't it more important to reflect upon our attitudes towards the creation? How do we relate to the creation? I mean, is it one of trust and generosity? Or is it more of suspicion and indifference. If one takes the air and mountains, if one takes the mind and the stars as far more than brute fact, take them as part of a larger cosmic pattern sustained by the rhythms of creation, the rhythms that hold us to their beat. If this speaks to any of us, then can one really call oneself an atheist? So be it. The gods are dead. Their withered bodies lie immolated on the altars of science and reason. The pious are exposed for credulous fools.
Nonsense. Belief in the gods is stronger than ever. It is true, of course, that the peacocks of the academy deceive themselves, that their worldly knowledge is all. But you should get out into the streets. Leave behind your chattering dinner parties and take a walk through the city. The shrines are packed, the temples blackened with the smoke of sacrifice.
Their belief is skin deep. They act this way because, well, they have always done so, not out of any deep conviction. They do not have the time or inclination to question. They're too busy trying to survive while their foolish leaders pitch them from one disaster to another.
The people need their gods in this perilous world of ours. It is their comfort and stay.
Oh, yes, of course, religion offers comfort and hope, but it also makes for anxiety and fear. It plays on the emotions of the credulous. It has nothing to do with truth. Only observation, testing, and rational inquiry can lead us to proper understanding.
You blind yourself to the truth that is not of this world. It is obvious that humans are born capable of glimpsing the divine. All people have that capacity, even if some choose not to use it. That is why there has never been and never will be a society without gods.
Humans created gods. primitive humans saw divinity in the sun, the moon, the stars, cycles of the season. They lacked scientific understanding of matter, the cosmos, and nature. Now, in time, politicians and rulers realized the power of religious belief and cynically twisted it to their own needs, to their own ends. There are no gods overseeing social order. There are no gods punishing wrongdoing. That is simply what our leaders teach us to, keep us in check.
Nah, atheism is a fad. Future generations will look back on it as a passing folly.
Quite the opposite. It is religion that is dying. It has no answers to the questions of the modern world, only adherence to outdated dogma and ritual. I know that belief in the gods is deeply rooted, and those who profit from it will fight tooth and claw to preserve it. But as true understanding of the world grows and spreads, it will be exposed for the vanity that it is.
Thank you, David. It made me want to slip into my toga, actually. And thank you, Monica, for joining me. Actually, what you heard just now was a typical meeting that Monica and I have on a regular basis. And the discussion continues. Just a couple of announcements that I want to run by you. First, we have begun our really important pledge drive. It is that which keeps these church doors open. And we started officially last Sunday on our Celebration Sunday, which was good fun. And if you, by any chance, missed last Sunday, or you just haven't gotten around to signing a pledge card, please do so this morning. In fact, on the way out to coffee hour this morning, the table to receive the pledge, to fill out a pledge card, to ask questions about a pledge, and to deposit them are right outside that door. Please be sure you stop by the table to do that, or there will be no coffee. We've had a... As important as your financial contributions are to this church, we also value so much new people who come exploring here, wanting to learn more about Unitarian Universalism. And on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, Monica and I will be hosting a UU orientation for those people who either are really, really new or who have been kind of new and want to learn more. Touch a little bit more on the history, a little bit on the theology generally, maybe more on this church specifically. So if you do have an interest, and we certainly hope you do, come by this Tuesday night at 7 o'clock right in our social hall. And it's always a good time. And we have great refreshments. And do they need to register for that? Okay. And the importance of registering is that we know whether or not you need childcare, and also so we know how much wine we need to purchase for the kid. The offering will now gratefully be received, a chance to greet one another and wish each other a fine good morning. I grew up believing that atheism was a sign of intelligence. Everyone in the Unitarian church of my childhood proudly claimed the atheist mantle. They carried an air of intellectual superiority because they were so utterly confident that the God of their respective Sunday school upbringing simply did not exist. They had risen above the fears of eternal damnation and were also free to eat meat on Fridays if they so chose. They walked through the church as if floating on air, no longer encumbered by religious superstitions, and Sunday services were a tribute entirely devoted to their enlightened minds. They acted as though they were God's gift to humanity. My home church and Unitarian churches generally, during the 50s and 60s, were held up by the pillars of science and reason. Anything remotely smacking of religion only manifested human weakness. Religion was an opiate of the people. My congregation was convinced, as many atheists still are today, that religion, almost by definition, suppresses science to the point that if Galileo were alive today, the church would still want to arrest him for his heretical view of the earth rotating around the sun. I'm reminded of a story told by the New York Times science writer Natalie Angiers,
who raised her daughter much like I was raised. She told her daughter, who was interested in seeing what it was like to go to a church. You know how kids are, they get to a certain age. But boy, if you've got a scientific mother, it's a different experience. And so she would tell her daughter, if you're going to have religion, then you got to be able to provide me with the evidence. That's what science does. You got to prove things, and religion has to prove things as well. And so her daughter had a friend, of course, which probably sparked her interest in church, and the friend believed in Jesus. And so Natalie's daughter said to the friend, look, let's have an overnight, and, let's wait up all night to see Jesus for ourselves. Wouldn't that be great? Which really represented a pretty clever methodology, because the daughter would then have a witness to the event. Don't take my word for it, but there's another person who saw Jesus as well as I did. Many of us are convinced that atheism is a modern invention, about as old as, the European Enlightenment, known, of course, as the Age of Reason. It was a period of intellectual awakening following the Dark Middle Ages. Science was new. Innovations, discoveries, challenged traditional religious view in, the 18th century, some of the 19th century. And these were the liberals, of course, who bucked convention. And as we realize today, liberals still have not grown much in popularity since that time. But the table was set during the Enlightenment in much the same way as it is today. The progressive views of science eclipsed God, religion, and all things supernatural, while church people insisted that life without God, life without religion, is a pathological symptom of a decadent society. But these antagonistic views were well established long before the Enlightenment. Disbelief in the supernatural goes back to ancient Greece. Plato chastised atheists in the 4th century before the Common Era. He would say, you, and he means you atheists, you and your friends are not the first to have held this view about the gods. There are always those who suffer from this illness in greater or lesser numbers. Well, now, whether or not atheism is an illness, as Plato contended, that's still up for debate. But at least he made it pretty clear that throughout all of history and across all cultures, there have always been those who resisted belief in the divine. The dialogue read by Monica and me this morning between a religious devotee and an atheist intellectual peacock never really happened, but the ideas in the dialogue could be traced to ancient Greek sources. On the one hand, the debate seems terribly modern, but 2.5 millennia ago, the same issues were debated, the same questions were raised as we hear today. Regardless where and when in time, atheism always seems to rock the boat. Atheists are not just a product of Western intellectual thought, but atheists exist in Afghanistan, Malaysia, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Sudan. And how do we know? Because today, as they have been through history, still today, they are sought out and executed. Much like Michael Servetus was back in 1551, burned to death on the order of John Calvin. Michael Servetus, who planted the seeds of Unitarianism by insisting that the Trinity was really an absurd concept, if you thought about it, was undoubtedly perceived by Calvin as having an illness that needed to be stopped. But I wonder how many atheists today would have flaunted their disbelief in 1551. I wonder. Anthropologists working in the Congo in the early 20th century discovered that most people there believed that the witch doctors were all frauds. This skepticism towards the supernatural, it's always been around. But in most cases, you'd want to keep your skepticism to yourself if you wanted to survive. Skepticism towards God or the gods goes back to the poet Xenophanes, who was kicking around Athens even before Socrates. Xenophanes noted in all his travels that humans always conceived of the gods to look exactly like themselves. For example, you pointed out if he visited an area whose population had a lot of blonde-haired people, the depiction of the gods all had blonde hair. And when he went to an area that had darker-skinned people, the gods all had darker skins. And this led him to exclaim, if horses and oxen had hands that could draw pictures, their gods would look remarkably like horses and oxen. Well, his conclusion was obvious and remains the mantra of many a non-believer today. Humans created God. In the year about 500 before the Common Era, the author of the 10th Psalm made atheism enough of a concern by addressing, and I quote, the wicked men who say there is no God. Now, plain and simple, atheists are troublemakers, either by Plato's assessment that they suffer this illness, or in the words of the psalmist, that these people are wicked. And across our culture today, atheists still carry this burden of somehow they're not fully trusted. Even some today would call atheists wicked people. Not adhering to the rewards and punishments distributed by an omniscient God, atheists are suspect, if not considered outright depraved kinds of souls. In the absence of God, it is believed they have no values. In mostly secular Europe, you know, where the democratic socialists live and hang out, atheists don't get this kind of traction. They're part of the mainstream there. But in this Christian nation, even though Christians suffer a bit from amnesia when it comes to the moral teachings of Christ, atheists here are still mistrusted. And the irony for me is that I believe more atheists in this country are in touch with the moral teachings of Jesus than are evangelicals and fundamentalists. Jesus, and this is not a political sermon, Jesus and Christianity stand worlds apart. Now, even the early church fathers, and if you ever want to read about some fascinating religious personalities, the early church fathers of them, they looked upon Christianity as, frankly, just another kind of life philosophy. They reformulated Christianity so that it looked very much like another school of Greek philosophy. Now, the Greeks had different philosophical schools like Cynicism, Stoicism, Epicureanism, skepticism, so on, etc., etc. And every school of philosophy back then, pretty much like every religious sect today, needed to cover essentially the very same tasks. Discern, first of all, what values you bring to the table, how, very much in a therapeutic sense, can we make people feel more confident in who they are, comfortable in their own skins, And how do we best deal with simply the practical problems of existence? So if you believe life is best lived when you dutifully play the hand that fate gives you, well, of course, you'll be hanging out with the Stoics. If you oppose the idea of divine intervention and your aim is to remove the stresses of anxiety of life's many demands by turning to fine foods and fine wines, doesn't sound that bad, but you would be part of the Epicureans. If you reject any kind of dogma at all, of course, you are a fellow skeptic. Now, these schools of philosophy, much like religion of today, filled many of the needs among society's poor. They offered help to those who suffered and tried to explain why it was important to be good even if the world was not always good in return. Basically, the old schools of Greek philosophy and the houses of worship of today, what they were all about was simply trying to make sense of the world. That hasn't stopped. How do we make sense of the world? How do we come to understand how life began, where we are headed, and why? Why anything from evil to illness to meaning itself? Richard Dawkins, one of the more famous atheists belonging to this school in what is called the New Atheism, Dawkins freely discusses his typical Anglican childhood and teenage years growing up in England. At that time, he embraced an Anglican Christian upbringing until about halfway through his teenage years, at which point he concluded that the theory of evolution was a better explanation for life's complexity. He then ceased believing in God. Dawkins stated, and I quote, "The main residual reason why I was religious was from being so impressed with the complexity of life and feeling that it had to have a designer. I think it was when I realized that Darwinism was a far superior explanation that pulled the rug out from under the argument of design." He finished the quote. "And that left me with nothing." That's quite a statement. That left me with nothing. I'm sure that many of us, if not most of us, can really relate to, kind of really understand this notion of being left with nothing. It does not sit well. Now, we may have developed our own satisfactory explanation for the ways of the world without a God, but must that then necessarily leave us with this emptiness, this kind of hole in our existence? You know, I think, quite frankly, that the liberal churches are trying mightily to fill that void. It's our biggest task, isn't it? To fill that void. Now, it's hard to conceive of Dawkins as ever having been a Christian, but explaining the universe through the idea of a designer actually has its own distinct history. Again, it was Plato who came up with the idea of a designer, only he called it the cosmic craftsman. What a psychedelic idea that is. I don't know what Plato was smoking at the time, but I wished I had some. The cosmic craftsman offers an enticing image, again, to explain the cosmos. There was always this human impulse to explain how the universe actually works, wanting to know the unknowable. And Plato's idea that the handiwork of a divine craftsman offers accounts for explaining the world as we know it. Because how else, the argument would go, how else can there be such order? You look around, everything's so well ordered. How can there be order in the complexity of life as we behold such visible beauty and ponder the world and the heavens? A craftsman, a designer, hey, why not? We are awed by the magnificence of it all and the many wonders that lie beyond our human comprehension. But then we find other explanations and the cosmic craftsman kind of just dissipates. Atheism has long enjoyed its role throughout history, playing the skeptic, the spoiler, challenging conventional aspects of God, looking for more rational explanations of where this all came from and how it really works. Atheists, of course, like to see the evidence and proof of things before they're going to commit to any kind of idea. And that's fine and legitimate and even necessary for living an honest life, a life without illusions or fear or guilt. Yeah, let's see the proof. As much as the rational mind rejects anything supernatural, I find today's so-called new atheism offensive and even insulting. The new atheism carries a self-congratulatory air of superiority reminiscent of my Unitarian church in the 50s. The atheists in our time write books that aim not only to present a rational explanation of the complexities of it all the various theories, how this all works, how we can come to understand it, much the way Darwin kind of originally did. But these new atheists act as priests, or better yet, maybe even, I should consider them exorcists. They are exorcists who try to purge us of this religious poison. Richard Dawkins, The God Delusion. Sam Harris, End of Faith. Christopher Hitchens, God is Not Great. Daniel Dennett, Breaking the Spell. All of them, they push the argument that belief in God is not a matter of private faith, but that belief must be regarded as a valid, scientific hypothesis that must be subjected to the standard methods of science. Well, isn't that just a little too easy to win? Of course, God fails the scientific test. Even so, the new atheists fail to acknowledge that most religious people have moved beyond biblical literalism, moved beyond a figure in the heavens who controls their lives and history. The new atheists still want to argue against earth and its creatures being created in 6 days, that woman was created from Adam's rib, that the sun stood still for Joshua. They refute the flood, eternal torture, immaculate conception, physical resurrection. And I want to say, guys, come on, get over it. We have moved beyond the Scopes trial in rural Tennessee, which took place almost 100 years ago. We're beyond that. But the new atheists are fighting old gods. They're fighting old religious beliefs, old explanations of how life has come into being. You know, sometimes the adolescents around here, they want to shock me a bit. You know, let's shock the old man here, and they'll come up to me and they'll say proudly, I'm an atheist. And, oh my, so I pretend to go on. But then I ask them, okay, tell me about the God you don't believe in. And chances are we're pretty much on the same page. So these lovely young adolescents and the famous new atheists both campaign against a God who has died a long time ago. The new atheists fail to see religion without its mythologies. Religion offers a highly intellectual framework for dealing with the same questions humanity has been pondering since the beginning of time. If you claim that a physical being who resembles us in appearance and emotion, a physical being who lives in the sky and sends us to hell if we misbehave, and helps a sports hero hit a home run at the right time. These are obvious falsehoods by which no rational human being will abide. But religion is not a poison to be exercised. The new atheist still holds steadfast to what the skeptics claimed in ancient Greece, that belief in the magical, mystical gods is a delusion. They call themselves the new atheists. However, if we regard religion as an avenue by which we explore what it means to be human, why there is suffering in the world, do we have any purpose here at all? Do we have an obligation to serve those in need? And how do we do justice? How do we love mercy? And we then come to understand that religion, all religion is providing us access so we can then intelligently respond to these existential questions. We can respond to the concerns that are all really lodged inside of us all. They're just kind of fused to our very being. How else do we process these very perplexing issues that we all face? And it's so great that we can do that. We can face these issues and concerns not alone, but in fellowship with others. And so we're talking neither dogma nor creed, and yet we agree. Science and reason prevail in dismissing the old gods. But there is so much more to religion. Without it, we are left with nothing. So be it. Can we close our service? Turning our hymn books, please, to number 138. As we extinguish the chalice, we recognize that life challenges us, but it also blesses us when we pause long enough to appreciate. In a church community such as ours, we are lifted by the exploration of life's possibilities. The world awaits our minds and hearts. We seek the strength to enter into life more fully so that we can share and serve, bring light where there are shadows, and liberation where there is despair. Such is our vision and our hope. Amen.
Again, David, thank you. Thank you so very much. Let us break for coffee, conversation, and please signing